Hello, and welcome to KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, trying to make the pandemic palatable by reading my writings. Just finished a wonderful weekend of virtual Dragon Con, at which I did a couple readings. Those should go up on YouTube at some point. I did a reading for the science fiction literature tracker I read for my Alien novel and my upcoming novel to Ellen Group. If you're coming here from seeing me at Virtual Dragon Con, welcome. This is my series of readings. This week I'm going to be doing a bunch of standalone stories, starting today with The Stone of the First High Pontiff. This may not be standalone forever. I came up with the idea of Jin the Human Finder a while ago. Never really did anything with it, aside from this one short story which I put together when I was invited to contribute to one of the Defending the Future anthologies. The Defending the Future anthologies are science fiction, mostly military science fiction, not mostly, they are military science fiction anthologies, edited by Mike McPhail, and now published by eSpec Books. And this was in one of the previous DTF anthologies, which was called Best Laid Plans. And I, for some reason, do not have a copy of Best Laid Plans, or if I do, it's somewhere I can't find it. But I did reprint it in without a license, so I'm going to read that copy. It's the same story. But this is about, this is in a far future. One of the things I thought would be a neat thing to do would be a far future in which Earth is a minor colony in a large system-spanning empire, where basically the Earth was conquered in much the same way that other imperialist nations have conquered smaller nations, and Earth becomes and humans become one of many subject species. So anyway, here is The Stone of the First High Pontiff. Jin yawned as she came onto the flight deck and saw that the ship hadn't moved since she went to bed. Timm didn't even turn to look at her, instead staring at the display on the nav. No, they haven't finished the maintenance on the Nimast corridor. No, they haven't given us an estimate as to when it will be done. No, we can't just go on our own steam, as that'll take 3 decades. Smiling as she took the co-pilot's seat on the cramped flight deck, Jin said, "Well, that answers 2 of my questions." Yeah, well, it wasn't until we entered hour number 14 that I started plotting a direct course to Texnaro just for shits and giggles. Jin shot a mischievous look through hooded eyes. "And it'll take as long as 3 decades? You're losing your touch." Timm shrugged and rubbed his smooth, dark scalp. "Well, that was at point 7. Any higher, we start dealing with time dilation. Nobody wants a piece of that shit." "On the other hand," Jin said with a sigh, "by the time 30 years go by, Berfnell might actually pay us." "You're such an optimist." "Are you sure we should be going to Texnaro?" Turning to Jin, Timm stared at her as if she'd gone Zlarix and grown a second head. "Excuse me? Did we not both agree, while sitting in these same chairs, right before we told Berfnell we'd find his daughter, again, that we'd go to Texnaro for the opening night performance of Down Among the Stars, assuming we found little Glarna before the 12th? And is it not now the 10th, giving us 2 whole days to get to Texnaro?" Jin winced. "I know, but..." She sighed. "Well, Berfnell hasn't paid us, and this corridor trip is going to take the last of our available cash." Timm's nose twitched the way it always did when Jin started talking about the dire state of their finances. "You're telling me that the new coil cost that much?" With a snort, Jin said, "It wasn't a new coil, it was a used coil, and it cost 100. A new one would have meant going into the emergency fund. And before you ask," she added quickly as Timm opened his mouth, "we are not dipping into the emergency fund to pay to park this beast at Texnaro." "Seeker is not a beast. She's a good book." Timm patted the console affectionately, which he always did whenever Jin told the truth about their tiny, cramped ship's rather dilapidated condition. He continued, "And we are too dipping into it if we have to, because you promised." He pointed an accusatory finger at Jin. She sighed. "What if I promise to get you a holoplay of the performance when it comes out?" 3 problems with that. 1, holoplays are never as good as the live performance. 2, only place I can run the holoplay is the half-meter space over my console here, which ain't exactly the kind of immersive experience you get from live theater. And 3, you already promised we'd go to Texnaro. So you promising to get me the holoplay in order to go back on your other promise is kind of unconvincing, you know? He got up from the pilot's chair. "Wake me if they actually put the damn corridor back online." Looking down at one of the displays, Jin saw that 3 messages had come in. Did you check your mail? That is all I have done for the past 15 hours. Not a single interesting thing there. We just got 3, and one is from the lighters. Timm rolled his eyes. Half the your mail we got was from lighters. Jin grinned. Which sect? Both. He shuddered. All the usual junk. Come to our side. We're more holy than the other side. Don't know why they blast it out to everyone like that. I mean, do they have any worshippers who aren't Vadish? Probably easier to do that than to just target the Vadish addresses. Jin shrugged. Anyhow, this doesn't look like the recruitment junk since it's addressed to the human finder. Timm grinned and Jin made a face. She hated being called that, but the appellation had stuck. It's from the High Pontiff himself, Jin said after tapping the Your Mail logo to bring the message up to the screen. He wants to hire us. Timm put his head in his hands. Oh, hell no. Please, Jin, no. We do not want to deal with religious types. They're always asking for discounts, and... Jin cut him off. They're willing to pay $2,000 just to take a meeting, regardless of whether or not we take the job. A several-second silence ensued after she said that. Finally, Timm spoke in a very quiet tone. Say that again. Slowly. Instead, Jin merely stared at him. She watched his face go through several emotions in succession, starting with annoyance at the need to miss the opening of Down Among the Stars, eventually modulating into a small smile at the thought of what he could spend his share of 1,000 marks on. Finally, Timm sat back down in the pilot seat. Let me see it. Before Jin could shoot the Your Mail to his console, the Broslow intership beeped. Timm tapped on it. Jin noted that the call was from the Nimast Corridor Control, and she hoped that it was good news. A voice spoke in heavily accented Quayar. This is the Nimast Corridor Control. Maintenance is complete, and Seeker is in the queue for transit. Your registry indicates that this is a Revenant ship? In the same language, Timm replied, Yes, the co-owners of this vessel are Revenant, and we're both unbonded. If you want, he added impatiently, I can provide proof of that won't be necessary, Seeker. You just need to be aware that there are 4 Ashloj ships in the queue, and they're ahead of you. That's fine, Corridor Control. We'll wait our turn. Out. Timm cut off the Braslow quickly, and then looked at Jin. Guess they have new folks in charge. With a shudder, Jin nodded. Last time they'd come through Nimast, they'd had to provide proof that they were unbonded. Of course, that was right after all those San Revenant slaves on Fortanon had rioted and run away, and everyone was on edge. Timm read over the mail from the lighters. Yeah, okay. He reopened the Braslow to Corridor Control. Nimast Corridor Control, go ahead, Seeker. Corridor Control, we need to alter our file destination. Jin had expected the receiving room for the High Pontiff of the Sacred Church of Enlightened Thought and Belief to be ostentatious. But her expectations were greatly exceeded. They had entered doors made of cast gravari and inlaid with gold. The floor of the room was entirely made of fringelt. Jin felt guilty even walking on it, and the ceiling likewise. The very long side walls were all decorated with hand-painted images of all of the previous High Pontiffs, going back 10 centuries before Jin and Timm's ancestral homeland of Earth was conquered by the Ashloj Collective. There were only about 80 of them. The Vadish were a long-lived people, although no one was appointed High Pontiff until they were already 200 years old, but each was surrounded by acolytes. The lengthy open room was supported by pillars, which were also made of fingelt. However, one expected that, as every Vadish structure of any size used fingelt pillars, etched with scenes from the lighter's holy texts. Standing in front of each pillar was a church warrior, none of whom, she noted with amusement, were Vadish. It seemed they felt safer hiring non-believers to protect them for some reason. Each warrior was armed with a Granido Zap sidearms and covered head to toe in Granido Blam armor. Jin had never been a big fan of firearms, but she knew from Timm carrying on like trash on the subject that Granido's goods were substandard, but also cheap, which was probably why the church went for it. At the far end was the High Pontiff's throne, made of solid gold. Jin couldn't imagine it was in any way comfortable. However, it did make it clear that throwing 2,000 marks around just to take a meeting wasn't even going to put a dent in their treasury. Sitting in the throne was the round, tentacled body of the High Pontiff himself. His deep brown fur had been shaved into the pattern that indicated that he was the leader of the church, or, at least, the half or so lighters who actually followed him. Next to him was another Vadish, whose white fur had been shaved into the pattern of a high acolyte of the church. The white-furred one spoke in the Vadish language with his upper mouth as Jin and Timm approached. Thank you for agreeing to the meeting, human finder. Please, you may refer to me as Jin. she said in the same language, hoping she was getting her pronunciation right. Vadish was created by a species with 2 mouths, each with a forked tongue, so it made for some entertaining sibilance. And you paid us to have this meeting, so to this meeting we gladly attend. How may we refer to you? I am the High Pontiff's voice, and we shall refer to you as Jin. Our compliments on your facility with the holy language of the Vadish. It is rare to find an outworlder who speaks it so fluently. Thank you. Jin had indeed noticed that she was speaking the language more comfortably than she had in the past. It was yet another change that had come to her life since the circumstance that led to her becoming the so-called human finder. I assume, Jin, that you are familiar with the schism that exists within the sacred church of enlightened thought and belief. Praise be to the church's wisdom. Jin nodded, then remembered that Vadish weren't very good at reading body language cues of non-Vadish. I am aware of the schism's existence, and that each sect believes itself to be the correct one. So you are not aware of the cause of the schism? Forgive me, but I am not. I regret to say that I am not a student of your church's history. Several of the voice's tentacles vibrated at that. Such is not part of our church's history, though it is, tragically, part of the history of the Vadish people. Long ago, in the earliest days of the sacred church of enlightened thought and belief, praise be to the church's wisdom, there was a stone that had etched upon its surface the words of the First High Pontiff. The artifact was lost, but the words inscribed upon it were recorded in the holy texts. There are those heretics who believe that the texts are in error, and that the stone has words other than those recorded. That is the basis of the schism, and it has only grown worse over the decades. Timm, who did not speak Vadish, was shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. Jin cast him a quick apologetic glance, then said to the voice, Do you wish me to find this stone? The voice's tentacles wiggled again, and 3 of his eye stalks turned toward the High Pontiff, who continued to sit upon the throne. If his lung flaps hadn't been vibrating, Jin would have thought that the High Pontiff to be dead. After a surprisingly long hesitation, the voice said, The High Pontiff, praise be to his great wisdom and knowledge, has learned of your exploits through the InformNet. Jin somehow managed to avoid chuckling. That last word had been spoken in Iraq, the common tongue of the Ashloj, and the one used on the InformNet. Vadish had no word for that, so the voice just appropriated the Iraq one. Jin had a hard time believing that the High Pontiff actually lowered himself to observe the InformNet. Based on all accounts, you have an enviable success rate. For that reason, the High Pontiff, praise be to his great wisdom and knowledge, wishes to engage your services to locate the stone of the First High Pontiff. Timm, who had been staring at the murals on the walls, looked over at those last words, which he apparently recognized. The voice went on. The High Pontiff, praise be to his great wisdom and knowledge, wishes this schism to end. For all those who believe in the sacred church of enlightened thought and belief, praise be to the church's wisdom, to once again be united under his guidance. The High Pontiff, praise be to his great wisdom and knowledge, believes that the retrieval of the stone of the First High Pontiff, lost all these many centuries, may be what at last enables our deluded fellows to return to the fold, and make the sacred church of enlightened thought and belief, praise be to the church's wisdom, stronger. If I am to accept this commission, Jin said slowly, I will need to know everything about the stone of the First High Pontiff. I will need to see not only the sacred texts, but also any heretical ones. The High Pontiff's tentacles quivered at that. And the voice quickly said, That will not be... Look, voice... She stopped, realizing she had gone back to Iraq. Taking a breath, she went back to Vadish. In order to perform my task, I must have every piece of information about the stone of the First High Pontiff, even information that is inaccurate. Even a lie may hold truths within it. The High Pontiff's eye stalks all focused on Jin, and for the first time he spoke. Unlike that of his voice, the High Pontiff's words came out in a raspy whisper. You speak the words of the Samna of Samno. Good. Good. Jin inclined her head in respect, though she hadn't the first clue who Samno was. The phrase was something one of her former owners used to say before she died. Half the High Pontiff's eye stalks looked at the voice, who then said, We shall provide you with all the available data on the stone of the First High Pontiff. Even the data that is heretical and false. I apologize for forcing you to acknowledge heretical work, Jin said quickly, but it is necessary to accomplish the task you have set out for me. In Iraq, Timm muttered, They tell us how much they're paying yet? Jin winced. She'd forgotten that part. She often did, which was why she preferred Timm to handle negotiations. After being a slave so long, the notion of being personally recompensed for work was still foreign to her. Her function as a slave had been to, among other things, handle her owner's finances, but that was after jobs were done, not before. Assuming, she continued, that we may properly negotiate payment. The voice's tentacles quivered. Payment has already been made. Jin frowned, remembering Timm's words about religious types trying to renege on paying their bills. For this meeting, yes, payment has been made. We have fulfilled the terms of that agreement. If I am to find the stone of the First High Pontiff, there must be recompense for that service. More of the High Pontiff's eye stalks glanced at the voice. Jin wished she knew more about Vadish body language. The voice then added, we will only provide you with further currency if you complete the task. Therefore, another 2,000 marks will be granted to you upon the return of the stone of the First High Pontiff to the Sacred Church of Enlightened Thought and Belief. Praise be to the Church's wisdom. Normally, this would be the part where someone haggled, but 4,000 was more than she'd gotten for any 2 jobs. This would enable them to do proper repairs on Seeker, and take a vacation besides. Jin had never taken a vacation in her life. She rather liked the idea. Very well, I accept your terms, she said. We will return when I have found the stone of the High Pontiff. If you find it. For the first time, Jin detected an odd note in the voice. Was it humor? Skepticism? Jin wondered if the voice didn't think much of the High Pontiff hiring some lowly Revenant from a conquered planet performing so important a task, and likely didn't think she was up to it. Not that Jin cared what the voice thought. Since she found the gem, she'd been able to find anything. As they walked back toward the exit under the many eye stalks of the previous High Pontiffs, Timm asked, please tell me you got us at least 10,000 for this. Jin blinked. What? No, I got another 2,000. That's 4,000, Timm. That's better. Whispering his shout so he didn't attract the attention of the High Pontiff or his voice, Timm said, you what? Look, I only know about 10 phrases in Vadish, but one of them is the stone of the First High Pontiff, and I heard you both using that one all over the damn place. That's what they want you to find, right? Yes. Timm shook his head. You didn't do any transactions, so I'm guessing they'll pay the other 2,000 when we come back with the stone. Jin nodded. Did you ask for expenses? This time Jin shook her head. Our expenses are never more than 2,000. In fact, they're never more than a few hundred, so... Waving her off, Timm said, doesn't matter. They can twiddle their tentacles all they want. We'll find it and sell it to the highest bidder. And I gotta tell you, the bidding will start at 5,000. No. They got to the ornate Fingelt door, which opened at their approach. Dozens of acolytes, as well as petitioners and other people waiting for a chance to see the High Pontiff, sat with varying degrees of patience outside in the vestibule. Neither Jin nor Timm spoke any more of this until they reached the port where Seeker was docked. Once they were safely on board with no prying ears around, Timm immediately went to the console and set the scan bots to start a security sweep. Jin agreed with the sentiment. She wouldn't put it past the lighters to plant a listening device on the ship to make sure they stuck to the plan. Smiling, Timm pointed at the display, which showed that no fewer than 3 such devices had been placed on board. Jin was very grateful that they'd spent the money on the scan bots, which she was planning to upgrade to the 6,000 model once this job was done, after what happened on Circe. All right, now that we can talk, Timm said, let's talk. We can get so much more for... No, Timm, I won't do that. Jin sat in the co-pilot's seat, relieved to be speaking in Iraq again. Her lips and tongue were exhausted from forming words in Vadish. I will not become someone who reneges on a contract. It's been hard enough to find work. People don't believe that I'm as good as my reputation. Chuckling, Timm said, if I didn't know your secret, I wouldn't believe you're as good as your reputation. Jin nodded, conceding the point. But I agreed to find the stone for the lighters, and these are people who have a massive platform. Even non-believers can't get away from hearing from them all the time. If we go back on a contract with them, we'll never get another job. For that stone, we'll make enough that we won't need one. Timm sighed. Yeah, okay, fine, we'll do it, but you should have talked him up another 1,000 at least. Shaking her head, Jin stared at her console, which indicated a new Your Mail, one of which came from the same address as the lighter's original message. Conjoined to that mail was a series of inform files. Okay, I'm gonna need to go through all this. Even with the gem, it should take me a few hours. Timm nodded. I'll take us out then. Take a nice, slow, leisurely journey to the KRAD corridor. Jin returned the nod and got up to head to her bunk. She was worried that Timm would just stay in the dock, but as she had pointed out many times, sitting in a dock cost money. Flying in space was free. At least, most of the time. When she entered her cabin, she immediately stripped down to her underclothing, necessary in the heat. After upgrading the security system, her next priority after this job was to finally fix the thermostats in the bunks. Discarding her coverall, she sat down on her bed and stared down at the gem embedded in her chest, right above her left breast, over her heart. She still knew nothing about the blood-red gem, or what it was doing in that asteroid field, or why it embedded itself in her chest dangerously close to her heart, or why since then she'd been able to literally find anything she set her mind to find. But shortly after she found the gem, or it found her owners died, and she and Timm, who was free but employed by Jin's owners, struck out on their own as the Human Finder. And she'd become more confident, more intelligent, more athletic. Her facility for Vadish had improved without any practice, and before the gem, if anyone had slapped her down the way Timm had, she'd have demurred and capitulated. Something else she needed to do was find a good doctor. She'd allowed herself to be examined by medics she could afford, none of whom could figure out how the gem worked, how it was doing what it was doing, or much of anything else. One even offered to surgically remove it, which Jin quickly declined until she knew more. But with the money they were getting for this, she could see a talented doctor. Grabbing a tablet, she touched the implant on the back of her neck, and the inform started to download right into her own mind. Then, as was always necessary after that kind of download, she fell asleep. As soon as she woke up, Jin knew everything there was to know about the stone of the First High Pontiff, from the stories about how the First High Pontiff dug the stone out of a quarry with his bare hands, and why he chose the script he chose, and how his successors each placed the stone in a place of higher honor, and how the stone was lost during the Pranic War when Vod was destroyed, and the stories of how the stone was smuggled out by acolytes, and so much more. She went back to the flight deck. Timm turned to give her an expectant look. Tell First Corridor Control that we need to book passage to the Wasafi Conclave. The voice of the High Pontiff sighed happily as he tossed the Hebrew grubs. Hebrew grew much more succulent grubs than the usual store-bought ones, into his lower mouth, while dictating a memo in Iraq to the bishopric with his upper mouth. Computers couldn't really handle Vladish. Against my direct recommendation, the High Pontiff has continued to attempt to find the stone of the First High Pontiff, despite the fact that the stone was obviously lost forever when Vod was destroyed by the heretics of Pranic. The legends that grew up around the stone were created to keep the devout from abandoning us following the destruction of our home world. The voice threw some more Hebrew grubs into his mouth. They were particularly good today, and he made a mental note to compliment his slaves for getting a good bunch. He continued to dictate his memo. However, we can take some comfort in the fact that the High Pontiff has, of late, become quite fascinated with the so-called Human Finder. He has become convinced that she will be the one to find the stone of the First High Pontiff. To that end, I have liberated 2,000 marks from the treasury to pay her off. She will search for it, never find it, and then the High Pontiff will finally let go of his obsession with using the stone to unite the factions. While the notion of bringing the heretics back into the fold in the abstract is a noble one, its practicality remains specious, especially since donations have increased 1,000-fold since the schism. However, the High Pontiff continues to drone on about his legacy, that he wishes the 99th High Pontiff to be remembered as the one who healed the schism. With luck, the Human Finder's failure to locate the stone will end this foolishness. As he popped the last of his Hebrew grubs, he added, and do not be concerned that the Human Finder will attempt to bring us a forgery. Providing a convincing forgery of the stone is far beyond her means. The materials alone for such a forgery would cost many thousands of marks. With that, the voice sent the memo off to the bishopric. He was looking forward to the imminent end of this obsession of the High Pontiffs. The following morning, he awoke to a Yormail that the Human Finder had returned with the stone of the First High Pontiff. The voice had to reread the message several times before he finally believed that it said what his eye stalks insisted it did. This isn't possible, he muttered as his servants tended to his fur before he met with the High Pontiff. When he arrived for his audience with the High Pontiff's private chambers, which only the voice and selected sex slaves were allowed, the voice was distressed at how joyful the High Pontiff seemed. His limbs were quivering and his eye stalks practically bouncing. A great day for the sacred church of enlightened thought and belief, is it not, my voice? So it would appear to be, most holy one. I am, however, surprised that the Human Finder was able to locate the stone of the High Pontiff so quickly. As am I, my voice. It is proof that she is quite extraordinary. Come, let us not keep her waiting, for today is a great day in the history of the sacred church of enlightened thought and belief. The voice followed several paces behind the High Pontiff as he entered the receiving room. Once the High Pontiff was seated in his throne, the voice instructed the computer to let the Human Finder in. When she entered, the voice had to once again be persuaded that his eye stalks were functioning properly. The Human Finder's face had several scars that were covered in dermal rep. Her hair was considerably shorter than it had been when last she was here, and it looked as if it had been singed off, while her companion had a massive bandage on the crown of his smooth scalp. The human finder was also holding a plastiform container. This is not possible, the voice said without preamble, and before the human finder could say anything. On the contrary, the human finder said, it is very possible. The stone of the First High Pontiff was in a storage unit located under the ruins of KRAD. Several of the voice's tentacles quivered. The stone of the First High Pontiff was in the territory of the Wasafi Conclave? Very deep within their territory, the human finder said. But I was able to retrieve it after a great deal of difficult searching. She exchanged a look with her taller companion. Then she touched the side of the plastiform container, which slid open, and she pulled out a round engraved stone the size of her fist. The voice found himself unable to speak with either mouth at first. It looked very much like what the stone looked like in contemporary images. He'd imagined it to be larger, but no, it had to be a forgery. Hadn't it? His voice even raspier than usual. The High Pontiff reached out with several tentacles. The stone, he said in Iraq. It has been found. At last. It has... Then the High Pontiff collapsed, rolling off the throne and onto the floor. Stunned, the voice stared for a second, then instructed the computer to summon medical help and activate the triage program. The computer intoned a moment later. All life functions in the 99th High Pontiff have ceased. Quickly, the voice stood up and spoke to the church warriors stationed at the room's pillars. Remove these heretics, and have them take their forgery with them. It is not a forgery. The human finder was speaking in Iraq now as well. I wouldn't have found it if it was a fake. That's not how this works. It doesn't matter what you say, the voice said in the same language to make it clear that he would not be doing business with forgers. He had no idea how they'd managed to construct a fake, but it simply could not be the same one. As the warriors stood behind each of the humans, the woman said, Our scanbot verified that this was made of Jivan. There's only, half an acre's worth of Jivan left in the galaxy? Less? There's no way we could have gotten our hands on that. This is the real thing. It doesn't matter, the voice said. Again, and truly it didn't. The High Pontiff is dead, and his ridiculous quest to reunite the church has thankfully died with him. You are heretics, and forgers, and you will remove yourself from this world as soon as possible. So you do betray me, said a raspy voice, also speaking in Iraq. All of the voices' eye stalks turned in shock as the High Pontiff rose off. Your treachery has been sent to the InformNet, so now the entire collective is aware of your heresy. With a start, the voice realized that was why the High Pontiff had been speaking in Iraq. Somewhere in the receiving room, he had sequestered cam drones that were blasting to the InformNet. Remove the voice and bind him by law, the High Pontiff said as he retook his throne. The warriors did as they were told. The voice said nothing else, not wishing to make a further fool of himself to the entire InformNet. He would wait his time to speak his piece. Half the bishopric was on his side, and the High Pontiff would soon see his support erode. At least that was what he had hoped. His own indiscretion would not sit well with his allies in the bishopric. Jin had entered the receiving room thinking she was going to make 2,000 marks, which was barely enough to cover what they went through to retrieve the damn stone. Then she thought she was going to be placed in a Vadish prison for the rest of her life. Then she thought they were going to get the money again. So when the newly resurrected High Pontiff instructed his warriors to escort them back to their ship, she was kind of surprised. Speaking again in Vadish, Jin said, Forgive me, please, High Pontiff, but we had an arrangement. You had an arrangement with my former voice. That arrangement is no more. For all that I am aware, you were part of his plan to discredit me. His plan, High Pontiff, was for me to never find the Stone of the First High Pontiff, but I have found it. That is not possible. He switched to Iraq. The stone was lost forever. I merely expressed interest in retrieving it to find out how deep my former voice's treachery was. That stone must be a forgery. Not yours, perhaps, but a forgery, nonetheless. No, High Pontiff, that is what is not possible. My ability to find things can't be fooled by a forgery. This is what I found when I sought out the stone. Take them away! The guards each put their hands on Jin and Timm's shoulders and started to guide them toward the exit. Jin supposed she should have been grateful that they hadn't unsheathed their granito zaps. Deliberately speaking in Quayar, Timm muttered, Now can we auction this thing off to the highest bidder? Several months later, Jin lay on the sands of the Covert beach, the twin sons of Covert gently baking her naked body. She had never taken a vacation before, and the last month on Covert had been magnificent. Never in her life had she been so relaxed. Once the first of the suns went down, she decided to see what was happening in the collective. Timm was due back the following day with the newly refitted Seeker, complete with the new Scanbot 6000, working thermostats, and shiny new coils, not to mention a general overhaul of parts. Easy enough to do when you sell the stone of the First High Pontiff to the heretical relativist sect for 50,000 marks. Touching her implant, she was able to get an ether air signal and do a quick InformNet download, bringing her up to date on assorted sports scores, news, and other stuff. She noted an abstract of a piece on the resignation of the 99th High Pontiff and activated that Inform. The surprise resignation of the 99th High Pontiff comes as record numbers of devout have left the lighters, deflecting to the relativist sect in light of that sect's revelation of the stone of the First High Pontiff. Jin couldn't help but laugh. It only would have cost the High Pontiff 2,000 marks to keep the stone for himself. Instead, he let them leave with it, and it cost him his job. In the meantime, the Council of Elders of the Relativist sect have announced that with the great influx of new members to their church, they are considering electing a High Pontiff from among their number. Jin went through the rest of the story, only to find no mention of her whatsoever. Indeed, that there was no mention that the Relativists acquired the stone, but that they simply had a revelation of it, whatever that meant. That was too bad. Being the person who found the stone of the First High Pontiff would be great for business, but she would have to settle for the large sums of money the Relativists paid her. She also had a Yormail from the 99th High Pontiff. She wondered if he sent that before or after he resigned. To the Human Finder, it seems I owe you an apology. Or perhaps I owe you nothing, since you have received more money for the stone of the First High Pontiff from those damned heretics. Either way, your skills are obviously greater than I gave you credit for, and in my eagerness to discredit my traitorous voice, I neglected the devout. I'll obviously never make that mistake again. Jin smiled. Maybe public recognition didn't matter so much. Again, that story is available in The Best of Defending the Future. That's the first batch of the DCF anthologies were published by Dark West, and since Dark West went under, eSpec Books took over the series, and they've continued to publish new anthologies. The old anthologies, they're not bringing those back into print, or at least not yet. But they did do a best of, which included The Stone of the First High Pontiff. It's also available in Without a License, which has a bunch of other stories, many of which I've read in this reading series. Also available from eSpec Books. So if you like military science fiction, definitely check out The Best of Defending the Future. It's got a lot of really cool military SF stories in them. And if you just like my work, then you can pick up Without a License. Or whatever. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. You can find me online at DeCandido.net. Read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. Support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD. And please stay safe. Take care.